Joining us is the President of Iceland, Olafur Grimsson. Good morning, sir. Thank you very much for joining us today. As I was saying there, the spotlight then was very much on your country 2 years ago. 2 years on, it shifted to Ireland and other European periphery nations. What lessons can Ireland learn from the Iceland experience of 2 years ago?
I think the difference is that in Iceland we allowed the banks to fail. These were private banks, and we didn't pump money into them in order to keep them going. So in our case, the state did not shoulder the responsibility of the failed private banks. And secondly, because of the krona, the independent Icelandic currency, we were able to devalue sort of considerably. So the export sectors, the fishing sector, the energy sector, the tourism sector, the IT sector, have in fact had quite a good time since the collapse of the banking system. And that's why the Icelandic economy is now coming out of this crisis earlier and stronger than anybody expected.
The problem is, though, Ireland, Greece, Portugal, Spain, they can't devalue their currency, can they? So that puts them in a bit of a straitjacket. Does that concern you that they don't have the ability to devalue their currency and export their way out of trouble?
Well, if we go back some years, the krona was then perhaps part of the trouble with respect to Iceland.
Of course.
But paradoxically, once the crisis happened, at least for the time being, the advantage of having a separate currency is that you can devalue and you can make your sectors much more competitive. And that is what has happened in my country, and therefore Iceland is faring much better than anybody expected.
You, of course, have just begun talks with the EU about ultimately joining the European Union project. Has what's happened in the last 6 months with Greece and Ireland, has this European sovereign debt crisis make you and your nation doubt that actually maybe keeping out of the EU might be better for us as a country?
Well, the negotiations, of course, will continue, but the crucial matter for Iceland has always been what will happen to the fishing sector, what will happen to agriculture, what will happen to the energy sector.
But the EU was saying whaling.
Well, whaling is a minor issue. I mean, the big issue is the control over the ocean resources, which is the very foundation of the Icelandic economy, and now, after the collapse of the banking system, has become even more important. So the negotiations will be a crucial determining factor. What will be the attitude of the Icelandic people with respect to the fishing sector, the agriculture, and all other natural resources?
I want to talk about the IceSave issue. Of course, I understand you're, as a country, still in negotiations with the UK, with the Netherlands, about paying back the depositors of IceSave. How close are we to a resolution of these discussions?
Well, the most significant factor is that the British and the Dutch have now recognized that the stand they took in 2008 and 2009 was fundamentally unfair. And the agreement they were pushing on Iceland at that time, was saying this is our final offer, was so unfair that now they have moved considerably away from that position. So we will have to see what becomes the final outcome. But the important factor is this, as we see now in the crisis in the other European countries, and that is the fundamental question. How far can we ask ordinary people, farmers and fishermen and teachers and doctors and nurses, to shoulder the responsibility of failed private banks? And I think now that question, which has been at the core of the IceSave issue, will now be the burning issue in many European countries. Will
there be another referendum? Because, of course, you blocked the initial plan to pay back the UK and the Netherlands, and then the referendum happened and the country rejected it 90%. Will there be another referendum? Was it 98%? Excuse me. Is there going to be another referendum on this?
Well, it's a constitutional principle that I don't issue a statement even before the negotiations are concluded. So because any new deal will have to go through the Icelandic parliament. But the essence of the referendum was simply this. If the people of Iceland are being asked to pay for the failure of a private bank, they should also have a say in the final outcome. So I don't think any deal which will not be in harmony with the will of the Icelandic people is viable.
Last question. IMF loan, of course, as we started the interview with, you of course, have received an IMF loan. Well, my question is, will you receive all of it? Do you need the final tranche?
No, I think, in fact, we have been doing much better than anybody expected. We have really outperformed on every criteria within the IMF program. So Iceland is now in much better shape and might be even sometime next year be able to wave goodbye to the IMF.
Yeah. And Ireland's big concern, of course, was losing their sovereignty. That's what the uproar has been in Ireland. Was there an issue at all in Iceland about losing your sovereignty, you know, having to accept measures by the IMF? Because that's why we've had such an uproar in Ireland in the last few weeks.
No, I don't think so, because in our case, it was a decision taken by our own government and our own parliament, and we had full control over that decision-making mechanism. But fundamentally, this is not just a financial crisis, it's also a fundamental test of our democratic systems.
Olafur Grimsson, President of Iceland, thank you very much for joining us today.